The cameras caught what no one expected: the once untouchable Prince Andrew standing alone, staring at the iron gates of Royal Lodge as the locks turned against him. But what could drive King Charles to strip his brother of protection so brutally? It began on a cold, quiet night when the Royal Lodge, once Andrew's sanctuary, suddenly became a fortress with him locked out. Neighbors, peering through curtains, whispered about strange activity earlier that afternoon: a convoy of dark cars, unfamiliar faces at the gates, and guards hurriedly changing shifts. Something felt off, and then, under the cloak of darkness, Andrew arrived. He was alone, without his usual retinue, expecting the usual nods of deference. But this time, the air was different. As he approached the gates, they did not open. The guards, standing rigidly, avoided his eyes. At first, Andrew assumed it was some procedural delay and miscommunication. He called out, his voice sharp but steady. Nothing. A tense silence hung in the air as the gates stayed locked, the guards motionless. Confusion gave way to disbelief as he stepped closer, his hands gripping the iron bars. He demanded to know what was going on, but his words fell flat against the stillness of the night. Inside the grounds, he could see lights flickering in the windows of his residence, yet not a single servant appeared to greet him. The staff he had known for years, the men who once saluted him, now stood in the shadows, deliberately avoiding his gaze. One guard finally spoke, his voice low, almost apologetic. "We have our orders, sir." Andrew's panic was now visible. He pleaded with them, insisting on his right to enter, reminding them of who he was, invoking the Queen's name, invoking his own titles. But the guards did not flinch. Not a single glance of sympathy came his way. Neighbors later described the scene as surreal. Andrew, once brimming with entitlement, reduced to begging at the gates of his own estate. Why now? Why here? The question hung heavy in the night air. It was unthinkable that such a move could come without warning. Yet those who had watched the royal family closely knew this had been brewing for months. Ever since Charles ascended the throne, whispers of tension had seeped out of Buckingham Palace like smoke from a hidden fire. The two brothers had clashed repeatedly over Andrew's place in the royal family, his scandals casting an ever-growing shadow over the monarchy Charles sought to preserve. And then, there was the rumor, dark and persistent, that Charles held a hidden dossier on Andrew, a collection of secrets powerful enough to justify this very moment. Some said it contained financial improprieties. Others believed it exposed personal failings. Whatever it was, its existence seemed to explain the steely resolve in Charles's recent public demeanor and the chilling finality of the guard's silence. But the story of that night began months earlier, when whispers of betrayal reached Charles's ears, whispers that would soon erupt into a royal confrontation. Behind palace walls, the bond of blood gave way to bitter enmity. What dark grievance could split Charles and Andrew so completely that even protection itself became a weapon? It hadn't always been this way. In their childhood, the two princes had shared moments of quiet laughter, of secret alliances against the pressures of royal life. Charles, the heir who carried the crushing weight of destiny, and Andrew, the carefree younger brother who once brought levity to the somber corridors of Buckingham Palace. But over the years, cracks had formed at first, then unmistakable until those cracks became chasms that neither could cross. The Queen's passing accelerated everything. With her gone, the fragile balance she maintained disintegrated overnight. Whispers of private arguments between the brothers began to leak from palace staff, reports of meetings that ended in shouting, of icy silences during family gatherings. Charles, newly crowned and determined to protect the monarchy from further scandal, found himself at constant odds with Andrew, who refused to shrink into the shadows. Even as his reputation tarnished, Andrew clung to his title, insisting that his place in the family was unshakable. Charles saw things differently. To him, Andrew had become a liability, his every move a threat to the dignity of the crown. The king's vision was clear. No more compromises, no more excuses. The monarchy would be above reproach, even if it meant cutting down his own brother to achieve it. Those close to Charles claimed he delivered a chilling ultimatum to Andrew months earlier, one final chance to withdraw quietly, to let the family heal and move forward. But Andrew refused, seeing submission as an admission of guilt he wasn't willing to make. This defiance only deepened Charles's resentment. The older brother, who had waited a lifetime to lead, now faced resistance from within his own family. Every attempt to contain Andrew's influence met with backlash, and Andrew, sensing his diminishing relevance, resorted to desperate gambits to retain what power and privilege he still held. He pressed allies for support, whispered to journalists, and even threatened to reveal family secrets if cornered. Yet, it was this very desperation that hardened Charles's resolve. To him, Andrew was no longer just a misguided brother but a danger to someone who would rather burn the monarchy than bow to it. The once unbreakable bond between them had turned to ash, and every quiet moment of their past now seemed like a prelude to this inevitable war. As the tension boiled over, Andrew's actions behind closed doors only deepened Charles's resolve to act ruthlessly. Beneath the polished surface of royal negotiations, Andrew struck a clandestine deal he thought would secure his place forever. But this bargain would become the noose around his neck. In the quiet aftermath of his public disgrace, Andrew moved swiftly and discreetly to secure what he believed was his last sanctuary. Through whispers and back channels, he approached trusted palace advisors, proposing a private arrangement that would allow him to remain at Royal Lodge indefinitely. On paper, it was presented as a dignified solution, a quiet retreat away from the spotlight where he could fade gracefully. But those close to the matter knew better. Andrew wasn't retreating, he was maneuvering. The deal itself was shrouded in secrecy. It bypassed formal royal channels and, most importantly, kept King Charles entirely in the dark. Andrew, calculating and confident, leveraged every shred of influence he still possessed. He hinted at sensitive family details, old conversations, hidden transactions, even alleged indiscretions that could tarnish the monarchy if ever made public. With these quiet threats hanging in the air, the advisors reluctantly agreed, granting him continued residence and a thin veil of protection. For a brief moment, this gamble emboldened Andrew. Neighbors noted his newfound arrogance, his assumption that the matter was settled. Even staff around the lodge noticed his tone change, his demands growing sharper, his presence heavier as if he had outplayed the king himself. But what he couldn't see was the silent storm building just beyond the walls of Royal Lodge. Palace insiders began whispering that the arrangement would not hold. Rumors spread of late-night phone calls between staff and Charles, of conflicting orders and quiet investigations into who authorized what. Some said that Andrew had gone too far by invoking family secrets, crossing an invisible line. Others claimed he underestimated how far Charles was willing to go to defend the crown. And then, the inevitable happened. The details of the secret deal reached the king's ears. No one knew exactly who betrayed Andrew, but the betrayal was swift and brutal. Charles reportedly referred to the discovery as treachery in my own house, his fury uncharacteristically visible even to senior aides. What Andrew thought was a masterstroke was, in Charles's eyes, a direct assault on his authority and an unforgivable breach of trust. But the most devastating blow was yet to come when Charles uncovered what Andrew had been hiding all along. Buried in a locked drawer at Clarence House was the Dossier evidence so damning it threatened not only Andrew's future, but the monarchy's itself. For months, whispers had swirled through the palace halls about quiet inquiries and shadowy figures tasked with uncovering the truth. Charles, unwilling to rely on hearsay alone, had ordered his own private investigators to delve into his brother's affairs. These weren't ordinary inquiries. They were relentless, thorough, and ruthless, prying into every corner of Andrew's life with a precision that stunned even seasoned courtiers. It was said Charles gave only one instruction: bring me the truth, whatever it costs. What they delivered surpassed even his darkest fears. Inside the dossier were letters and emails that revealed a pattern of desperate correspondence pleas for money, quiet promises to influential figures, and veiled threats when those promises were not met. There were records of secret meetings in discreet corners of London, transactions funneled through obscure accounts, and personal failings catalogued in painful detail. The contents painted a portrait of a man clinging to his privilege through manipulation and secrecy. There were notes about financial misdeeds, quiet favors exchanged for silence, and whispers of alliances forged with people whose loyalty to the crown was questionable. The more Charles read, the deeper his expression hardened. Witnesses recalled his face as he leafed through the pages, cold, grim, and finally, resolute. It wasn't just about Andrew anymore, it was about the integrity of the monarchy itself. For Charles, this dossier became his weapon, his justification. It gave him the moral high ground he needed to act decisively, to revoke his brother's protection and silence the murmurs of favoritism. The evidence turned personal bitterness into righteous duty, making clear that the monarchy could not endure under the weight of Andrew's secrets. Yet one question continued to gnaw at those closest to the king. Had Andrew suspected he was being watched? Had he felt the walls closing in as the investigators pieced together his private life? Some believed he had grown paranoid in those final weeks, glancing over his shoulder, testing the loyalty of those around him. Others insisted he remained oblivious until the moment the gates locked and the guards turned their backs. Either way, the truth was undeniable now. Armed with this explosive information, Charles summoned his brother for a final, fateful showdown. Behind locked doors, two brothers faced each other in a storm of accusations and bitter truths, a royal reckoning decades in the making. Andrew had been summoned to Clarence House under the pretense of a private discussion. The tone of the invitation was polite, almost casual, but its timing late at night, abrupt, with no explanation, left him uneasy. Still, he arrived wearing the faint confidence of someone who believed he still held cards to play. But the moment he entered, it was clear the meeting was no mere discussion. Eyewitnesses spoke of an atmosphere so heavy it silenced even the staff outside the room. Shouting erupted not long after Andrew's arrival, punctuated by the sharp crack of a door being slammed so hard the walls trembled. At one point, voices rose so high that guards posted in the corridor could hear fragments of the exchange. Charles's voice, cold and commanding, and Andrew's, first defensive, then cracking under the weight of what was being said. On the table between them lay the dossier. Charles presented it like a verdict, sliding the pages toward his brother with deliberate force. One by one, he listed the offenses, letters, accounts, clandestine meetings, all documented and undeniable. With each accusation, Andrew's face reportedly paled further. At first, he denied, dismissing them as misunderstandings, claiming the king's advisors had twisted the truth. But when Charles pressed on, demanding a confession, the fight seemed to drain from him. Andrew shifted tactics, abandoning denial for desperation. He pleaded with his brother to reconsider, invoking their shared childhood, their mother's memory, even his loyalty to the family over the years. He promised to change, to withdraw quietly if given time, but it was too late. Charles's response was chilling in its finality. "The crown comes before you," he said, the words cutting through the room like a blade. Those who heard later said Andrew visibly flinched at the phrase, his shoulders collapsing, under the realization that nothing he could say would change the king's mind. In the end, there was no agreement, no handshake, no hollow words of brotherhood to soften the blow. Andrew left the room visibly shaken, his steps unsteady as he emerged from behind the locked doors, his usual arrogance replaced by something closer to dread. Whatever hope he clung to as he arrived at Clarence House that night had been stripped away before he crossed the threshold again. But even after this bitter confrontation, Andrew still believed he could outmaneuver the king until the guards arrived. Once, his every step was shadowed by protection. Now, their silence spoke louder than their weapons. The guards who once bowed now looked through him. Andrew returned to Royal Lodge that evening, believing he could still salvage the wreckage of his standing. He arrived in haste, his car cutting through the night toward what he thought was still his sanctuary. But as he approached the familiar gates, the atmosphere felt wrong. He noticed it before he even stopped the engine. The guards stood motionless, their eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond him, their hands at their sides, refusing to acknowledge his presence. He honked once, then twice, nothing. Stepping out, Andrew's voice cracked the quiet as he called to them, but no answer came. He demanded the gates be opened, reminding them who he was, invoking his rank and heritage, but the guards remained still, his tone sharpened as his patience unraveled. The gates stayed shut. Inside the grounds, the lodge was cloaked in darkness. Windows that should have been lit stood black and still, and the familiar, comforting glow of his home was gone. He pressed forward, expecting someone to emerge and explain, but the lights stayed dim, and the doors remained locked. Witnesses later described hearing him yell, his voice rising into something that sounded closer to panic than command. One neighbor claimed she could hear him pleading, bargaining, even threatening, but every word was swallowed by the same unyielding silence. Even as he rattled the iron gate with his bare hands, the guards stayed at their posts, staring through him like he didn't exist. The symbolism of the moment was impossible to ignore. The protection he had once taken for granted, the men who once formed a wall between him and the world, had been stripped from him without ceremony. To stand outside his own home, unacknowledged and powerless, was a humiliation few could imagine. A royal exile delivered not in words, but in silence. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as the scene unfolded. One swore they saw him collapse against his car, clutching his chest, his shoulders heaving with something that could have been grief, rage, or sheer exhaustion. The same man who once commanded armies of staff now stood alone in the dark, defeated before his own gates. This night would leave scars that no title could conceal. Both his dignity and his health appeared to waver under the weight of what he had lost. But what none of them yet knew was that this was only the beginning. Yet even as Andrew crumbled, the king's next move would strike deeper than anyone imagined. The family's reaction was as fractured as the man himself. As Andrew fell, the royal family itself splintered, forced to choose sides in a battle between blood and crown. The morning after the gates closed on him, whispers spread through the palace corridors like wildfire. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, his daughters, were the first to respond, arriving at Royal Lodge despite the guards' icy stares. Neighbors spoke of tearful embraces, of Eugenie visibly distraught, trying to speak reason to the men who now ignored her father. But it was already clear to everyone watching that their loyalty to their father would come at a steep cost. Behind closed doors, they pleaded with Charles for mercy. But the king remained unmoved. Camilla, however, seemed to see things differently. To her, Andrew's removal was not only justified but necessary. Sources close to her claimed she was the one who urged Charles to act decisively, warning him that hesitation would only invite further scandal and weaken the crown. Some even suggested she had delivered the final push that turned deliberation into action. William and Catherine, meanwhile, remained the picture of restraint, at least in public. But behind the stoic faces lay quiet approval. Those close to the couple claimed William privately told his father that the monarchy's survival depended on showing no weakness, no favoritism, no matter how painful. Catherine, ever the diplomat, is said to have comforted Beatrice and Eugenie privately while standing firmly with her husband in supporting the king's decision. As the family took their positions in this silent war, tensions mounted with every public appearance. There were reports of late-night phone calls between cousins, secret meetings in Kensington apartments, and cryptic comments exchanged at family dinners. Each gesture, each glance, seemed loaded with unspoken accusations or reluctant support. Even Harry, watching from afar, reportedly reached out to Andrew with a brief but cutting message. "You should have seen it coming." Andrew's collapse had become a test of loyalty for every member of the royal family. In choosing between a brother, a father, or the crown itself, each of them revealed where their true allegiance lay. The fractures ran deep, and once exposed, they could not be easily repaired. But while his family debated his fate, Andrew made one last desperate attempt to reclaim his place. With nothing left but his pride and memories, Andrew approached the king one final time, begging not for forgiveness, but for mercy. After the confrontation at Clarence House and the public humiliation at Royal Lodge, Andrew retreated into silence. Days passed without a word, and the family assumed he had finally resigned himself to the inevitable. But in truth, he was planning one last appeal, a desperate attempt to sway his brother's resolve. Those close to him said he stayed up through the night, scribbling and discarding drafts of a handwritten letter, each more pleading than the last. In the end, he delivered it personally to the palace, a quiet envelope bearing only the words, "For my brother." The message worked. A tense, private meeting was arranged at Balmoral, far from the press, far from the relentless gaze of London. The setting, so steeped in family history, only amplified the stakes. Andrew arrived visibly exhausted, but there was still a flicker of defiance in his step, as if he hoped that in this secluded corner of their shared past, he might still reach the man behind the crown. Eyewitnesses who lingered just outside the room would later describe what followed as one of the most harrowing moments in royal memory. At first, Andrew tried to speak calmly, invoking their childhood, their shared grief over their mother, even the loyalty he believed he had shown Charles during his most trying times. But as the king remained silent, Andrew's composure faltered. His voice cracked, words tumbled into sobs, and finally he fell to his knees, clutching at his brother's hand, begging not to be cast aside completely. But Charles did not flinch. Those who heard his response said it was delivered in a voice cold and certain, the voice of a man who had already mourned the brother he once knew. He reminded Andrew, as he had before, that his duty was to the crown above all else. Family ties, however precious, could not outweigh the survival of the monarchy. Andrew rose slowly, the weight of those words settling over him like lead. When he emerged, his eyes were red, his face drawn, his expression hollow. Whatever hope had carried him into that room had been stripped away before he left it. Within hours, the final blow was delivered, a formal notice declaring that his protection at Royal Lodge was revoked, effective immediately. Guards would no longer stand watch. The gates would no longer open at his command. And as the sun rose over the Royal Lodge, Andrew's isolation became complete, yet whispers of a final secret still lingered. Even as Andrew vanished from the public eye, rumors persisted of one final secret, one so dangerous it could unravel the monarchy if revealed. Though the gates of Royal Lodge had closed against him, and his titles were stripped bare, whispers within the palace grew louder. Insiders insisted that Andrew still possessed something so explosive it kept even the boldest advisors awake at night. Some claimed he held hidden documents, meticulously collected over the years, proving the royal family's darkest dealings. Others suggested recorded conversations, sharp and damning, that could shatter reputations if ever made public. A few even spoke of financial trails that wound their way into shadows the monarchy could not afford to illuminate. Behind the curtains of power, debate raged. Was Andrew truly defeated, his spirit broken and his leverage gone? Or was he simply biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back? Palace aides argued in hushed tones over whether Charles had truly ended the threat or provoked it into something even more dangerous. After all, a cornered man with nothing left to lose can become a weapon no one expects. Those few who caught glimpses of Andrew in the weeks that followed described him as a ghost of himself, yet there was something unsettling in his stillness. Some swore they saw him poring over papers late into the night, speaking to no one, his expression unreadable as he plotted what many feared might be his final act of defiance. The haunting image of the fallen prince, alone in the lodge he once commanded, became a symbol of the monarchy's own fragile balance. For Charles, there was no turning back. His actions had solidified his resolve as king, but may also have created a dangerous enemy within his own bloodline. Even those closest to him wondered if the king had underestimated just how far his brother would go to reclaim even a sliver of power or to take everyone else down with him. And so the question lingered, thick in the air. Had the king truly silenced his brother or merely unleashed him? As the cameras fade, the world watches, breathless, wondering what the fallen prince might do next. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.